The October wind carried the scent of memory across Stone Creek Ranch. Samuel Whitmore sat in his grandfather's rocking chair, the same chair that had witnessed 75 years of decisions and their consequences. His hands, mapped with the topography of a life lived outdoors, rested on the worn armrests. Each scar told a story, each callus marked a chapter in a book that was nearing its final pages. Beside him stood his grandson Thomas, 18 years old, and burning with the same restless energy Sam remembered from his own youth. The boy wore his Sunday best, despite it being a Thursday, his enlistment papers for the Great War folded in his breast pocket. Tomorrow he would board a train to Fort Bliss. Today he had questions. "Grandpa Sam," Thomas said, his voice cutting through the afternoon quiet like a bell. "You never talk about the war. My friends, their grandfathers, tell stories about Gettysburg, about Antietam, but you just sit here and look at the land." Sam's eyes drifted across the ranch. 200 head of cattle grazed on grass that had been here longer than any white man's memory. The fence line stretched 3 miles to the east, 2 miles to the west. Good fences, strong posts, wire that didn't sag. Beyond the pastures rose the purple shadows of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, eternal and indifferent to the small dramas of men. "The war didn't define me, boy," Sam said finally. His voice carried the roughness of age and tobacco, but beneath it ran a current of something else, something that made Thomas lean forward. She did. From his vest pocket, Sam withdrew something small and delicate. An Apache dream catcher, no bigger than his palm. The sinew web was still strong despite decades hanging in the New Mexico air. Tiny turquoise stones the color of summer sky were woven into the pattern. The leather frame had been touched so many times it shone like polished wood. Thomas had never seen his grandfather hold anything with such care. "This belonged to your grandmother," Sam said. "She made it the winter after we met, when this ranch became more than just land. It became home, real home, the kind you fight for, the kind you die for." "Grandma Ayanna," Thomas whispered. He knew the stories, or thought he did. The beautiful Apache healer who married the widowed rancher, the woman who lived to be 115 years old, who had passed just this spring, taking with her the last living memory of a world that no longer existed. "Sit down, boy," Sam said. "I'm going to tell you something, not because you asked, not because you're leaving tomorrow, but because some promises outlive the men who make them, and you need to understand what that means before you go off to fight somebody else's war." Thomas settled onto the porch steps, his young face upturned with interest. The afternoon light painted everything gold. Somewhere in the distance, a cowbell clanged. The windmill creaked its eternal rhythm. Sam closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of years and the wisdom earned through fire and blood and redemption. "Let me tell you about 180 nights." The words hung in the air between them. 180 nights my daughters cried themselves to sleep after their mother died. 180 nights I walked the floors of this house trying to quiet babies who wanted their mama and couldn't understand why she wasn't coming back. Sarah was 14. She became hard angry, like steel left too long in the forge. Emma was 9. She stopped talking for 3 months. Just stopped. And Beth, little Beth, was only 5 years old. She screamed herself hoarse every night at sundown, like she knew darkness meant her mother was truly gone. Sam's hands trembled slightly on the armrests. Thomas had never seen his grandfather's hands shake. 47 neighbors came to help in those first months. Good people, Tom, people with kind hearts and strong backs. But one by one they left, because broken men with broken children are hard to be around. Because grief is heavy, and it makes you heavy to carry. Because there's only so much anyone can do when a house is filled with ghosts. The old man opened his eyes and looked directly at his grandson. "I had $427 in debt to Lincoln County Bank. 14 days before they would foreclose on 160 acres that my father had died defending from Comanche raiders. I was sleeping 2 hours a night, maybe less. I stopped shaving, stopped eating regular. The cattle were dying because I couldn't keep up with the work. The fences were falling. And every night, every single night, Beth screamed. Thomas felt his throat tighten. He had never heard his grandfather speak this way, never heard the raw wound in his voice. And then, Sam said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, on March 15th, 1878, she came. The words settled like dust after a storm. She rode out of the dawn mist with 5 words that changed everything. I was in the barn trying to fix a harness I'd broken the day before when I heard this tiny sound, like a mouse, like breathing. I climbed up to the hayloft and there she was. Sam paused, remembering. 40 years collapsed into this moment. A little Apache girl, no more than 7 years old, clutching a deerskin pouch like it was the most precious thing in all creation. She had a bullet wound in her shoulder, not deep, but deep enough. Someone had tried to kill her, Tom, tried to kill a child. And somehow, by God's grace or dumb luck, she'd found her way to my barn. Rosa, Thomas said. He knew that name. His grandmother's daughter from her first marriage, the woman who now ran a trading post in Albuquerque with grandchildren of her own. Rosa, Sam confirmed. She didn't speak English, just watched me with these enormous dark eyes, terrified and exhausted and brave in that way. Children are brave when they have no choice. I gave her water from my canteen, cleaned her wound with whiskey, and wrapped it with the only clean cloth I had, which was a shirt Margaret had made me before she died. And Rosa, she just sat there and let me work, biting her lip to keep from crying out. The rocking chair creaked as Sam shifted his weight. She pointed west toward the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, 40 miles of the roughest country God ever made. She said one word, Shima. I didn't know much Apache, but I knew that word meant mother. And I understood that somewhere out there, a woman was either looking desperately for her daughter or was past the point of looking for anything. Sam reached into his vest again and withdrew something else. A piece of paper folded many times, yellowed with age, but still intact. He didn't open it, just held it. Rosa had this in her pouch. A Spanish land grant from 1821, 5,000 acres in the Sangre de Cristo range, granted to her great-grandfather by the Mexican government, legitimate under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Legal. Binding. Worth even then maybe $100,000 for the silver deposits beneath it. Thomas's eyes widened. Someone wanted her dead for the land. Someone wanted her family dead for the land, Sam corrected. And they'd already killed 17 people to get it. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I had a wounded child in my barn, $427 in debt, and daughters who couldn't stop crying. The smart thing would have been to take her to Sheriff Dalton, let the law handle it. The profitable thing would have been to collect the $5,000 bounty I learned about later that day. The old man's jaw tightened. 3 riders came up to the house around noon. The leader was a man named Silas Crow, bounty hunter out of Texas, mean as a snake and twice as quick. He told me there was $5,000 for an Apache woman and her child wanted for killing the territorial governor in Santa Fe. Said she was dangerous. Said she'd cut a man's throat as soon as look at him. But you didn't believe him, Thomas said. I didn't know what to believe, Sam replied. But I looked at that little girl hiding in my barn, and I thought about my own daughters, and I made a choice. I told Silas Crow I hadn't seen anybody, told him to get off my land. And when he rode away, I knew I'd just made myself part of whatever this was, knew I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The sun was lower now, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. That evening I brought Rosa into the house. And Tom, you should have seen the look on Sarah's face. Pure fury. You brought an Indian into Mama's house, she said, like I'd committed some kind of sacrilege. Emma just stared. But Beth, little Beth, who hadn't smiled in 3 months, she walked right up to Rosa and said, "Don't cry, Mama's in heaven, but Papa's here." And Rosa, who didn't understand a word of English, she smiled anyway, because children understand children in ways that don't need words. Sam's voice grew softer. That night around midnight I heard something, a sound like wind, except it wasn't wind. I went outside with my rifle and suddenly she was there. Ayanna came out of the darkness like a ghost knife in her hand, moving so fast I barely had time to raise my arms. We fought. She was strong, stronger than she looked, and skilled in ways that spoke of hard-won knowledge. I was trying not to hurt her, trying to subdue without damage, and it was harder than fighting to kill. Sam paused, his eyes distant with memory. And then Rosa screamed from the window, one word, Shima, mother, and everything stopped. Thomas realized he'd been holding his breath. The change that came over Ayanna's face was like sunrise breaking over darkness. She dropped the knife and ran to her daughter. What followed was a reunion that I felt privileged to witness and ashamed to watch, something so private and profound it seemed wrong for a stranger to see. They held each other and cried, and Ayanna checked Rosa for injuries with hands that shook, speaking in rapid Apache I couldn't understand, but whose meaning was crystal clear. She'd thought her daughter was dead. She'd been searching for 3 days through country that would kill a man in 2, following cold trails and false leads, and the desperate hope that mothers carry when their children are lost. The rocking chair stilled as Sam leaned forward. Finally, after long minutes, Ayanna looked up at me. Her hand stayed on Rosa's shoulder, protective. Her other hand moved toward the knife on the floor. Not threatening yet, but ready. Sam's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, and Thomas had to strain to hear. She spoke in English, clear and unaccented, which surprised me. "You saved her," she said. "Why, found her in my barn," I replied. "She had a bullet wound that needed tending. Couldn't exactly leave her there. But you could have turned her in. There is a bounty." $5,000, I acknowledged. "That's a lot of money for a child's life. For most men, enough money." "I'm just a man who's done enough things he regrets," I told her. Didn't see any reason to add selling out a 7-year-old to that list. Sam sat back, his eyes focusing on something beyond the horizon, beyond the present moment. She studied me then, measuring, calculating probabilities and risks. And whatever she saw in my face, it was enough. She spoke to Rosa in Apache rapid words I couldn't follow, and Rosa answered, touching her bandaged shoulder and gesturing toward me. Whatever the child said mattered, because Ayanna's whole body relaxed slightly. "I am Ayanna," she said. "This is Rosa, my daughter. You have my gratitude for protecting her." "Samuel Whitmore," I replied. "This is my ranch. And before we go any further, I need to know what happened. Why a 7-year-old child is running through the wilderness with a bullet wound and men hunting her like an animal." The old man fell silent for a long moment. A breeze stirred the cottonwood leaves, making them whisper secrets to the gathering dusk. What she told me then, Tom, it changed everything. Not just that night, not just that year, everything. "What did she say?" Thomas asked, unable to keep the urgency from his voice. Sam looked at his grandson with eyes that had seen too much and remembered all of it. "She said, 'They killed my husband for this land. Now they want my daughter dead so no one can claim it, but I will not run any more.'" The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. "You can't fight the whole territory," I told her. "Watch me," she said. Sam reached down and picked up the dream catcher again, turning it slowly in the fading light. That was the moment, Tom. Right there. When a broken widower with $427 in debt and 3 daughters who cried every night decided to stand beside a woman he'd just met. A woman who was everything this territory feared and hated. A woman who should have been a stranger forever, but who spoke 5 words the next morning that sealed both our fates. "What 5 words?" Thomas whispered. Sam smiled a small, sad smile that held decades of memory. The next morning, Beth woke up screaming as usual. Sarah was angry as usual. Emma was silent as usual. I was exhausted as usual. The ranch was dying. The debt was crushing. The world was dark. And Ayanna walked into the kitchen, looked at my daughters, looked at me, and said 5 words that 180 nights of prayer hadn't brought. The old man's eyes glistened. She said, "Now I am here." Thomas felt something catch in his chest. And for the first time in 180 days, my daughter stopped crying. Because Ayanna didn't come to help. She didn't come to visit. She came to stay. She came to fight. She came to heal what was broken, even though she was broken herself. Even though she had every reason to keep running, to take her daughter and disappear into the wilderness where white men couldn't find her. Why? Thomas asked. Why did she stay? Because, Sam said quietly, some people are born to run and some people are born to stand. And Ayanna, she was done running. The sun touched the horizon, turning the whole world to gold and shadow. That's where the story really begins, Tom. Not with the war I fought in Virginia, not with the cattle or the land or the money. It begins with those 5 words. Now I am here. Because everything that came after all the blood and fire and justice and love, it all grew from that moment. From a woman brave enough to stop running, and a man desperate enough to believe in something again. Sam stood slowly, his joints protesting the movement. He handed the dream catcher to Thomas. You're going to war tomorrow. You're going to see things that will break you, do things that will haunt you. And when you come home, if you come home, you'll wonder if goodness still exists in this world. The old man gripped his grandson's shoulder. It does, but you have to choose it. You have to stand beside it when everyone else is running. You have to protect it, even when protecting it costs you everything. Thomas looked down at the dream catcher in his hands, feeling the weight of something more than sinew and stones. What happened next, Grandpa? After she said those words, Sam turned toward the house where lamplight glowed warm in the windows, where a life had been built from ashes and promises. What happened next, he said, was the hardest and best year of my life. The year I learned that the battles that matter aren't fought with guns. They're fought with the choice of who you stand beside when the whole world tells you to walk away. He paused at the door. Come inside, boy. I'll tell you the rest. All of it. Every truth and every cost. Because tomorrow you leave for France and you need to know that wars aren't won by killing enemies. They're won by protecting the people who make us remember why we fight. Thomas followed his grandfather into the house, the dream catcher still warm in his hands, as the October night settled over Stone Creek Ranch like a blanket made of stars, and memory, and promises that outlived the men who made them. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, the wind carried the scent of sage and thyme and stories that needed telling before they were lost forever to the turning of the world. The lamp oil burned low as Samuel continued his story. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, the same table where 5 decades of meals had been shared, where children had learned their letters, where life's great decisions had been made over coffee that was always too strong and bread that was never quite soft enough. Outside, the October wind tested the windows. Inside, memory filled the spaces between words. 2 weeks passed after Ayanna said those words. Sam began, his weathered hands wrapped around a tin cup that had gone cold an hour ago. 2 weeks that should have been simple. Keep your head down, stay quiet. Let the wounded child heal and then send them on their way. That's what a smart man would have done. He paused, looking at the cup as if seeing through it to another time. But I'd stopped being smart the day Margaret died. Grief does that to a man, makes him either too careful or not careful enough. I'd been too careful for 3 years, watching my daughters suffer, watching my ranch die inch by inch, too afraid to change anything because change meant admitting she was really gone. Thomas said nothing. The silence was an invitation to continue. Ayanna didn't wait for permission to start fixing things. That first morning, April 1st, 1878, I woke up to find her already in the kitchen. She'd made coffee, real coffee, not the burnt chicory mess I'd been choking down. The smell of it pulled me from bed faster than any rooster. Sam's voice softened with the memory. She was teaching Beth how to grind corn for tortillas. Beth, who hadn't spoken more than 5 words at a time since her mother passed, was chattering like a bird. asking questions in English that Ayanna answered in Apache, and somehow they understood each other perfectly. Emma was setting the table, actually smiling. Even Sarah was there, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, trying to look angry, but failing to hide her curiosity. "What about Rosa?" Thomas asked. Rosa sat by the window watching her mother with eyes that never left her, like she was afraid if she blinked, Ayanna would disappear again. The child was healing, but slowly. The bullet wound was clean, no infection, but something inside her was broken in ways that flesh and bone couldn't show. Sam stood and walked to the window, looking out at darkness that held 40 years of ghosts. The coffee was the first miracle. Strange to call coffee a miracle, but when you've been drinking dirt water for 3 years, when your hands shake so bad you can barely hold the cup, when the simple act of brewing something decent feels impossible, then yes, it's a miracle. Ayanna had found wild chicory root, roasted it herself, mixed it with grounds I didn't even know I still had. She served it in Margaret's good cups, the china ones I'd packed away because using them felt like betrayal. He turned back to Thomas. That's when I should have known, should have understood what was happening, because Ayanna wasn't trying to replace Margaret. She was honoring her. Using the good cups meant the house was alive again, meant we were worth the good things, not just surviving, but living. "Do you understand the difference, Tom?" Thomas nodded slowly. The second week of April brought rain. Not the gentle spring rain that makes things grow, but the hard, driving kind that turns roads to mud and makes cattle seek shelter. The roof leaked in 3 places. I'd been meaning to fix it for 2 years, always finding reasons to put it off. Ayanna spent one afternoon up there with tar paper and nails, moving like she'd been born on rooftops. Sarah finally asked her, "Where did you learn that?" And Ayanna said, "Apache women build homes. We don't wait for men to do what we can do ourselves." Sam chuckled, a dry sound like wind through dead grass. Sarah didn't like that answer, but she respected it, started helping with the repair. 2 women on a roof in the rain, hammering down patches, while I stood below holding buckets of tar, feeling useless and grateful all at once. He returned to his chair, settling into it with the careful movements of age. But the real test came on April 23rd. I remember the date because it was Margaret's birthday, would have been her 38th. I'd spent the previous 3 years drinking myself sick on that day, letting the ranch fall apart while I wallowed in what I'd lost. This year I woke up planning to do the same, had a bottle of whiskey hidden in the barn waiting for me. Thomas leaned forward. Beth found me there around noon. I was already 3 drinks in, sitting in the hay, looking at nothing. She was only 5 years old, Tom, but she looked at me with eyes that were older than they should have been. "Papa," she said, "Miss Ayanna says you're sad today because you remember Mama. She says remembering is good, but drowning is bad." Sam's voice roughened. I don't know what my face looked like, but it made Beth step back. Then Ayanna was there, moving so quiet I hadn't heard her approach. She didn't take the bottle, didn't lecture, just sat down in the hay beside me and said, "Tell me about her." So I did. For the first time in 3 years, I talked about Margaret, really talked. About how we met at a church social in 1862, right before I enlisted. About how she waited 4 years while I fought in Virginia, never knowing if I was alive or dead. About how she turned this bare patch of dirt into a home planting cottonwoods that are now 50 feet tall, making curtains from flour sacks, teaching our daughters to read from a Bible held together with string. About how she died slowly, fever eating her from the inside, and how I couldn't save her because I didn't know how. The old man's hands trembled slightly on the cup. When I finished, Ayanna was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My husband's name was Koda. He was strong and kind. He believed peace was possible between our peoples." On the morning of March 10th, soldiers came to our village. They said we were trespassing on federal land. Koda showed them the land grant proved our legal right to be there. The yellow-haired colonel shot him in the chest. No warning, no trial, just death. Then they killed the others. 17 people, Tom. Old men who could barely walk, women who were cooking breakfast, children who were playing. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. She continued, her voice flat, like she was reading from a book instead of living through memory. I was gathering medicine plants half a mile away with Rosa. We heard the shots. I hid my daughter in a hollow tree and told her to stay silent no matter what. Then I ran back, but I was too late. They were all dead. The soldiers were searching the bodies, looking for the land grant Coda always carried. They wanted to destroy the proof of our rights. But Coda was careful. He'd given me a copy for safekeeping. Sam's eyes were distant, seeing that barn on that day 40 years ago. Then she looked at me and said, "You couldn't save your wife. I couldn't save my husband. We both carry that weight. But we can save our children. We can choose that they don't grow up drowning in our grief. That's the only honor we can give our dead, to live well for the living." He wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. I poured the whiskey into the dirt that day. Haven't touched a drop since. Because she was right. Margaret wouldn't have wanted me to drown. She would have wanted me to live, to raise our daughters, to be a man they could be proud of. The lamp flickered shadows dancing on the walls. That night, after the girls were asleep, Ayanna and I sat on the porch. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled wet and clean. She asked me about the war, so I told her. Told her things I'd never told Margaret, never told anyone. About Gettysburg. About watching boys younger than you, Tom, die screaming for their mothers. About the smell of a battlefield 3 days after the fighting, when the dead have started to rot under the summer sun. About killing a Confederate soldier in hand-to-hand combat, close enough to see his eyes to know he was terrified, just like me. Sam's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I told her about the guilt. About how every man I killed probably had a wife, waiting children who would grow up fatherless. About how victory felt like ashes. About how I came home to build a life in a place where that violence couldn't reach me, only to find that death doesn't need a war to find you. It found Margaret. It found Coda. It finds everyone eventually. What did she say? Thomas asked. She said, "In Apache, teaching warriors who survive battle have a responsibility. They must live fully, must create life to balance the death they've caused. You've been half dead for 3 years, Samuel. It's time to be fully alive." Sam stood again, moving to the mantel where photographs stood in frames. He picked up one that showed a younger version of himself standing beside a beautiful woman with dark hair and knowing eyes. 3 days later, on April 26th, Beth got sick. High fever, 104 degrees. I'd seen that fever before. It's what took Margaret. I rode 3 miles in the dark to fetch Doc Henry Miller, the only real doctor in Lincoln County. He was a good man. Doc Miller, educated back east, came west because he'd lost his own family to cholera and wanted to start fresh. Thomas recognized the name. Doc Miller had died years ago, but his reputation lived on. Doc examined Beth for 20 minutes. When he came out of her room, his face told me everything. "I can't break the fever, Sam," he said. "I've given her everything I know, but it's not enough. She'll be dead by morning. I'm sorry." Sam's hands clenched into fists. I'd been a soldier. I'd faced men trying to kill me with rifles and bayonets and artillery that turned the ground to liquid fire. But nothing prepared me for hearing that my youngest child would be dead by dawn. I fell apart, Tom, just broke. Sat on the floor outside her room and wept like I hadn't wept since Margaret died. Then Ayanna was there kneeling beside me. "Let me try," she said. "I have medicine, herbs, knowledge my mother and grandmother taught me." "Doc Miller said there's nothing," I told her. "Doc Miller is a good man," she replied, "but he only knows one kind of healing. Let me show you another." Sam set the photograph down gently. What happened next, Tom, I can only describe as watching someone dance with death and win. Ayanna worked through the night. She had plants I'd never seen, roots and leaves and bark. She ground them with a mortar and pestle, mixed them with water from our well, boiled them into teas that smelled like earth and rain and something older than words. He moved back to his chair, sinking into it. She gave Beth yarrow to break the fever, chamomile to calm her, golden seal to fight whatever infection was burning through her small body, willow bark for the pain. And then she did something Doc Miller never did. She sang. Soft Apache songs that I didn't understand but that made the air in that room feel different, lighter, like hope had weight, and she was adding it to the balance. All night she worked. Sarah stayed awake too, watching from the doorway, with eyes that went from skeptical to awed. Emma held Beth's hand, believing with the pure faith that children have before the world teaches them doubt. And I prayed to a God I'd stopped believing in 3 years ago, prayed that if he was listening, if he cared at all, he would let my daughter live. The clock on the wall ticked into the silence. At dawn, Beth's fever broke, dropped from 104 to 99 in 2 hours. By noon, she was sitting up asking for food. Doc Miller came back expecting to prepare a body for burial. Instead, he found Beth eating cornmeal porridge and arguing with Emma about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. Sam laughed, a sound that held wonder even after 40 years. Doc stood in that doorway for 5 minutes just staring. Finally he said, "I don't know what you did, Miss Ayanna, but I've been a doctor for 30 years and I've never seen anything like it." She just smiled and said, "Sometimes the oldest medicine is the best medicine." He leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. Word spread faster than fever. By the next day, 5 neighbors had come asking if Ayanna could look at their ailments. Old Tom Richardson with arthritis so bad he could barely hold a fork. Mary Sullivan's baby with colic that wouldn't stop. James McCreary with a cough that had lasted 3 months. Ayanna treated them all. Didn't ask for payment, just gave them herbs and instructions and quiet kindness. Within a week, Sarah stopped being angry, came to me one morning and said, "Papa, I was wrong about her. She saved Beth. She's saving all of us." Then she did something that broke my heart and healed it all at once. She took off the locket she'd worn every day since Margaret died, the one with her mother's picture inside, and she gave it to Ayanna. Said, "Mama would want you to have this, because you're doing what she can't do anymore." Thomas saw tears on his grandfather's weathered cheeks. That night, after all the girls were asleep, I found Ayanna on the porch again. She was wearing the locket. I sat beside her, and for a long time we just listened to the night. Coyotes singing in the distance, wind through the cottonwoods, the small sounds of a ranch settling into darkness. Finally I said, "Thank you, for Beth, for all of it." She turned to me and replied, "Don't thank me yet. The men who killed my husband, who want my daughter dead, they're still coming. And when they arrive, anyone standing with me becomes their enemy too." I remember looking at her in the starlight, this woman who'd appeared in my barn 2 weeks ago like an answer to prayers I hadn't known how to pray. I said, "Then I guess we'd better be ready when they come." Sam fell silent for a moment, gathering the threads of memory. She smiled at that. First real smile I'd seen from her. Then she said something that I didn't understand until much later. She said, "In my dream last night I saw 2 trees. One was dying roots, dry branches bare. The other was wounded sap, bleeding, but still alive. In the dream their roots grew together, and both trees lived." I asked what it meant. She said, "I don't know yet, but my grandmother taught me that true dreams always come in their time." The old man's voice grew softer. That was the moment, Tom, right there. When I stopped thinking of Ayanna as a stranger, I was helping, and started thinking of her as well as something more. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of love. The first time since Margaret that I looked at a woman and felt something besides grief. He looked at his grandson directly. 2 days later, on May 5th, Silas Crow came back. But this time he brought 4 men with him, all armed, all mean. They rode up to the house at noon, spread out like they'd done this before, hands near their guns. Thomas tensed in his chair. Silas called out, "I know she's here, Whitmore. I can smell Apache from a mile away. Hand her over, and there won't be trouble." I stepped out onto the porch with my Winchester, old habit from the war, Never face a threat unarmed. I said, you got no jurisdiction here without the sheriff, and Sheriff Dalton ain't with you. Silas laughed. Don't need the sheriff. Got a warrant from Judge Morrison. Says I can search any property in Lincoln County for fugitives. So step aside. Sam's jaw tightened with remembered anger. That's when Ayanna walked out. Just walked right past me, calm as sunrise, and stood at the edge of the porch. She looked at Silas and said, I'll go with you, but you leave this family alone. I started to protest, but she cut me off. It's better this way, Samuel. You've done enough. And, Tom, I almost let her do it. Almost let her sacrifice herself because it was easier, safer, smarter. But then Sarah appeared. My 14-year-old daughter who'd lost her mother and hardened into something fierce. She was holding my shotgun, the big 10-gauge that kicks like a mule. She pointed it at Silas and said, You ain't taking anybody. This is our land, our family, and she's part of it, so get. Pride filled the old man's voice. Emma came out next holding a cast-iron skillet, then Beth clutching Ayanna's skirt and saying, You can't have her. She's ours. 3 little girls against 4 armed men. Should have been suicide. Would have been except. He paused for effect. Except Doc Miller came riding up with 12 other men, neighbors, people Ayanna had healed, people who'd heard what was happening and decided they wouldn't stand for it. Doc said, Silas, you got a warrant, you need the sheriff to serve it, and Sheriff Dalton ain't here. So unless you want to explain to Judge Morrison why you started a shooting war in Lincoln County, I suggest you ride out. For a long minute nobody moved. Then Silas spat tobacco juice and said, This ain't over, Whitmore. You're protecting a murderer. When they hang her, they'll hang you beside her. He rode off with his men, but slowly making sure we all saw the threat in his eyes. Sam rubbed his face with both hands. After they left, Doc pulled me aside. Sam, he said, I like Miss Ayanna. She's got knowledge that could help a lot of people. But Silas is right about one thing. The law says she murdered Governor Wade. Judge Morrison signed that warrant. You keep protecting her. You're making yourself a fugitive too. Is she worth that? I looked back at the porch where Ayanna stood with my daughters around her, all of them watching me. Beth was holding her hand. Emma was pressed against her side. Even Hard Sarah looked at Ayanna like she was something precious, and I realized the answer wasn't complicated. I told Doc, she saved my daughter's life. She brought light back into a house that was dying from darkness. And she's innocent. I know it the way you know your own heartbeat. So, yes, she's worth it. She's worth everything. The lamp oil was nearly gone now, the flame guttering. That night was the second time Ayanna and I talked on the porch. But this time was different. This time I knew what I was feeling, knew it was dangerous and impossible and exactly right all at once. Sam's voice grew gentle. I told her, You should go. Take Rosa and disappear into the mountains. I'll give you supplies, a good horse, everything you need, because Silas will come back with more men, and next time people might die. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I've been running for 2 months, Samuel, running from soldiers, from bounty hunters, from the men who killed my husband and want my daughter dead. I'm tired of running, and your daughters, they need someone, not to replace their mother, but to show them that women can be strong and soft at the same time, that we can heal and fight, that we don't have to choose. They need you too, I said. Maybe, she replied. But I need them, need to remember why I'm fighting, what I'm protecting. Rosa needs to see that not all white men are killers, that some of you are good, that maybe her mother was right to believe peace is possible. Sam stood and walked to the window one last time. Then she did something that changed everything. She took my hand, just held it, her fingers rough from work and healing, warm in the cool night air. And she said those 5 words again. Now I am here. But this time they meant something different. They meant I'm staying, I'm fighting, I'm choosing this place and these people and you. He turned to face Thomas. So I said, then we fight together. Whatever comes, however it ends, we stand. We stand, she agreed. Outside, the wind had died down. The October night was silent except for the distant sound of cattle moving in their sleep. That was April and May of 1878, Sam said. The months when a stranger became family, when my broken daughters started to heal, when I remembered what it felt like to hope. The months before the real trouble began. Thomas opened his mouth to ask more questions, but Sam held up a hand. Enough for tonight, boy. You need sleep before your train tomorrow. The rest of the story, the hard parts, the blood and fire, that's for another evening. But I wanted you to understand this much, that the battles worth fighting aren't always the ones with guns. Sometimes they're the battles to let people in, to trust again, to believe that broken things can be mended if you're brave enough to try. He placed his hand on Thomas's shoulder. When you're in France, when the world is exploding around you and you can't remember why you're there, remember this. You're fighting so that people like Ayanna and Rosa have a place to be safe, so that children like Beth can grow up, so that broken men like I was can find healing. That's what war is supposed to protect. Not land, not pride, people. Always people. Thomas stood the dream catcher still in his pocket and embraced his grandfather. I'll remember Grandpa Sam. I promise. The old man held his grandson for a long moment, then released him. Good. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow you become a soldier. Tonight you're just a boy listening to an old man's stories. Let's keep it that way for a few more hours. As Thomas climbed the stairs to his room, Sam extinguished the lamp and sat in darkness, remembering Ayanna's hand in his, remembering his daughters' faces when they realized they were allowed to love again, remembering the moment when 5 words changed the trajectory of everything. Now I am here. 4 decades later, those words still held power, still meant safety and home, and the promise that some things once broken could be made whole again if you were willing to fight for them. Outside, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Inside, an old man closed his eyes and smiled because memory, even hard memory, was a kind of gift when you'd lived long enough to see how the story ended. And their story, his and Ayanna's, had ended well. That was worth remembering. That was worth passing on. That was worth every battle they'd fought to make it true. The morning Thomas left for Fort Bliss, the sky was the color of old bruises. Sam stood on the platform watching the train carry his grandson toward a war that would reshape the world, and he thought about another departure, another kind of battle. When he returned to the ranch, Ayanna was waiting on the porch. At 68 years old, she moved with the same grace that had startled him 40 years ago, though now silver threaded through her dark hair like moonlight through storm clouds. You told him the beginning, she said. It was not a question. The beginning and the middle of the beginning, Sam replied, sitting beside her. Not the hard parts yet. The hard parts are what make the story true. Sam nodded slowly. Tonight, then. When he writes from camp, I'll write back. Tell him the rest in letters, so he understands what he's fighting for. But that night, sitting alone in his study with pen and paper, Sam found himself writing not to Thomas, but to the ghost of his younger self. The man he'd been in June of 1878, standing on the edge of choices that would define the rest of his life. The letter began, "This is what you need to know about healing and hunting, about the month when everything changed." June came to Lincoln County with heat that made the air shimmer like water. The spring rains had ended, and the land was beginning its long conversation with drought. On the ranch, life had settled into rhythms that felt almost normal. Sarah helped Ayanna in the garden, learning the names of healing plants in both English and Apache. Emma read to Rosa from books that had belonged to Margaret, the 2 girls sitting in the shade of the cottonwood tree heads, bent together over pages worn soft from use. Beth followed Ayanna everywhere, a small shadow learning to grind corn and identify herbs and sing songs in a language her father didn't understand. Sam worked the ranch with an energy he hadn't felt in years, fixed the fences that had been falling, branded the spring calves, rode the fence line looking for breaks and finding instead a strange kind of peace. The debt to Lincoln County Bank still hung over everything, but Doc Miller had quietly spread word that Sam's ranch was under community protection. Most of the neighbors respected that. Some even brought their sick livestock for Ayanna to examine paying in smoked meat or labor or simply gratitude. It should have been enough, should have been the happy ending to a story about second chances. But on June 15th, the temperature was 103 degrees in the shade, and Beth stopped eating breakfast. Sam noticed first. His youngest daughter, who had recovered so miraculously from the fever in April, sat at the table pushing food around her plate with the wooden spoon Ayanna had carved for her. Her small face was pale, her eyes too bright. "Baby girl," Sam said, keeping his voice light despite the fear crawling up his spine. "You feeling poorly?" Beth looked at him and tried to smile. "Just not hungry, Papa." Ayanna's hand went to Beth's forehead before Sam could move. She held it there for 3 heartbeats, her face showing nothing, but Sam had learned to read the tension in her shoulders. When she spoke, her voice was calm in the way that preceded storms. "Sarah, take your sisters outside. Feed the chickens." Sarah knew better than to argue. Within minutes, the 3 older girls were gone, and it was just Sam, Ayanna, and Beth in the kitchen that suddenly felt too small. "How high?" Sam asked. 104, Ayanna replied. "Maybe higher." The same fever that had nearly taken Beth in April. The same fever that had killed Margaret. Sam felt his hands begin to shake, and he gripped the edge of the table to hide it. "You beat it before," he said, and heard the desperation in his own voice. "You can beat it again." Ayanna lifted Beth, gently cradling the child against her chest. "This is different. The fever came faster. That means the sickness is stronger or Beth is weaker. Either way, we need Doc Miller." Sam was already moving toward the door. "I'll ride to town. Be back in 2 hours." "Sam!" Ayanna's voice stopped him. "Bring him fast, but bring him careful. Silas Crow has been asking questions in town, about you, about me, about who's been visiting this ranch. Doc says the bounty hunter is building a case waiting for the right moment to strike." Sam met her eyes. "I don't care about Silas Crow." "You should," she said quietly, "because he cares about $5,000, and desperate men do desperate things." The ride to town took an hour and a half. Sam pushed his horse harder than he should have, arriving in Lincoln with the animal lathered and blowing. He found Doc Miller at his office, a small building that smelled of carbolic acid and old tobacco. The doctor took one look at Sam's face and started gathering his instruments. "How long has she been fevered?" "Since this morning. Maybe longer." She hit it. Doc Miller's expression tightened. "Children do that. Think if they don't complain, the sickness will go away on its own." He packed his black bag with swift efficiency. "I'll need to bring laudanum. If the fever gets worse, she'll need something for the pain." They were mounting their horses when a voice cut through the afternoon heat. "Well now, Sam Whitmore and Doc Miller riding out together. Where might you be headed in such a hurry?" Silas Crow stood in the doorway of the saloon, thumbs hooked in his gun belt. He'd gained weight since May, probably from spending the bounty money he'd collected on other jobs. His face had the red flush of a man who drank too much and slept too little. "Medical emergency," Doc Miller said shortly. "None of your concern." "Everything in Lincoln County is my concern when there's a wanted fugitive involved." Silas stepped into the street. "I hear tell that Apache woman is still at your ranch, Sam. Still healing folks. Still pretending to be something other than a murderer." Sam's hand moved toward his rifle, but Doc Miller's voice cut through the tension. "Silas, I'm a doctor. I have a patient who needs me. You want to have this conversation? We'll have it later. But if that child dies because you delayed me, I'll make sure every person in this county knows it was your fault." The threat hung in the air. Silas was mean, but he wasn't stupid. He spat tobacco juice and stepped aside. "Later then," he said, looking at Sam. "Real soon." They rode hard. Doc Miller asked no questions about Beth, saving his breath for the speed they needed. When they reached the ranch, Sarah was waiting in the yard, her face streaked with tears. "She's worse, Papa. So much worse." Inside the house was dim and hot, despite the open windows. Ayanna had moved Beth to the coolest room, the one that faced north, and caught whatever breeze existed. The child lay on a pallet of blankets, her small body trembling with fever, her breathing rapid and shallow. Doc Miller examined her with hands that were steady, despite his age. He checked her pulse, her pupils, the glands in her neck. He listened to her chest, with his stethoscope pressing the cold metal to skin that was hot enough to burn. When he straightened, his face was grave. "It's the same fever," he said quietly, "but stronger this time. Her body's tired from fighting it before. She doesn't have the reserves." "Can you help her?" Sam heard his own voice crack. Doc Miller looked at Ayanna. "Can you—" Ayanna knelt beside Beth, smoothing the damp hair from the child's forehead. "I can try, but I used all my strongest herbs in April. Yarrow, golden seal. The plants that fight fever best don't grow near here. I'd need to travel into the mountains to find them. 3 days there and back, maybe 4. "She doesn't have 4 days, Doc Miller said. "I know." The silence that followed was broken only by Beth's labored breathing. Sam looked at his youngest daughter, remembering her birth 9 years ago, how Margaret had nearly died bringing her into the world. How Beth had been small and weak, but fought to live with a fierceness that belied her size. How she'd survived when the midwife said she wouldn't. How she'd brought joy back into their lives after 3 years of grief. He couldn't lose her. Couldn't bury another piece of his heart in the dry New Mexico earth. "Then I'll go," Sam said. "Tell me what you need. I'll ride fast. Get it back in time." Ayanna shook her head. "You don't know the plants. Don't know where they grow or how to harvest them without killing their medicine. It has to be me." "You can't go alone into the mountains," Sam protested. "Silas knows you're here. He could be watching, waiting for you to leave the protection of the ranch." "Then he'll have to catch me first." Ayanna stood her decision made. "I'll leave at sunset. Travel at night when it's cooler and harder to track. Be back in 3 days if I ride hard. And if Beth dies while you're gone," the words came out harsher than Sam intended, born of fear and helplessness. Ayanna's voice was gentle. "Then I'll have tried everything I know, and you'll have the comfort of knowing we didn't give up." She turned to Doc Miller. "You'll stay. Keep her comfortable." "I'll stay," Doc Miller confirmed. "I'll do everything medical science knows how to do. You do everything your medicine knows. Between us, maybe we save her." "Maybe." The word hung in the air like smoke. Ayanna prepared to leave with the methodical calm of someone who'd learned long ago that panic solved nothing. She packed light, a bedroll, dried meat, 2 canteens of water, her knife, and a leather bag for the plants she'd harvest. She wore clothes Sam had never seen, Apache garments that allowed her to move silently and blend with the landscape. Before she mounted her horse, she spoke to each of Sam's daughters. To Sarah she gave instructions for caring for Beth. To Emma she entrusted Rosa's care. To Beth, burning with fever and only half conscious, she sang a soft Apache lullaby, and whispered words in a language the child didn't understand, but responded to anyway, her breathing easing slightly. Then she turned to Sam. They stood in the barn where they'd first met, where Rosa had hidden, and where everything had begun. "If I don't come back," she started, "you'll come back. If I don't," she continued firmly, "the land grant is hidden in the cellar, wrapped in oilcloth beneath the 3rd stone from the east wall. Give it to Rosa when she's grown. Tell her it's proof that her people had rights, that the land was legally ours, that we didn't die for nothing." Sam's throat tightened. "You're coming back." Ayanna reached up and touched his face, her calloused fingers gentle against his weathered skin. "I thought I was done feeling this," she said quietly. "Thought when Coda died that my heart died too. But you and your daughters, you taught me that hearts don't die. They just wait for someone brave enough to make them beat again." Before Sam could respond, she kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. All the conversations on the porch, all the shared silences, all the growing understanding that what existed between them was more than gratitude, more than partnership, something that didn't have a name, but felt as real as ground beneath feet. Then she was gone, riding into the purple dusk, disappearing into the landscape like she'd been born from it. Sam stood in the barn doorway long after she'd vanished, his hand touching his lips where hers had been. His heart, a complicated tangle of hope and fear. Doc Miller found him there an hour later. "Beth's resting," the doctor said. "Fever's holding steady. Not better, but not worse. That's something. How long can she last like this? 2 days, maybe 3 before her body gives out. Ayanna was right to go. It's the only chance." Doc Miller pulled out his pipe-tamped tobacco into it, but didn't light it. "Sam, there's something you should know. When I was in town getting my supplies, I heard talk. Silas has been recruiting 4, maybe 5 men. He's planning something. Let him plan. When Ayanna gets back with the medicine, when Beth is well, we'll deal with Silas. And if he doesn't wait, if he comes while she's gone?" Sam finally turned from the doorway. His face in the lamplight looked older than his 35 years carved by worry and determination in equal measure. "Then he'll find out why I survived 4 years of war, why I'm still standing when better men are buried. He'll find out that some things are worth dying for, and my daughters are at the top of that list." Doc Miller lit his pipe, the flame briefly illuminating his craggy features. "I figured you'd say something like that, which is why I brought this." He pulled a shotgun from where he'd leaned it against the barn wall. "Extra firepower, just in case." The 2 men stood together in comfortable silence, veterans of different battles, but warriors nonetheless, waiting for whatever the night would bring. Inside the house, Beth moaned in her fevered sleep. Sarah sat beside her little sister, bathing her forehead with cool water, the way Ayanna had shown her. Emma read aloud from their mother's Bible, her young voice steady despite her fear. Rosa knelt in the corner, hands pressed together in prayer that combined Apache tradition with the Christianity the mission school had tried to teach her. The night deepened. Stars emerged hard and bright and indifferent to human suffering. Somewhere in the mountains, Ayanna rode through darkness, trusting her horse and her knowledge and the slim hope that she'd find what she needed in time. And in the barn, Sam cleaned his rifle with hands that didn't shake, preparing for a war he hoped wouldn't come, but knew was inevitable. Because men like Silas Crow didn't wait for convenient moments. They struck when their prey was weakest, when protection was thinnest, when the people you loved were most vulnerable. Sam had learned that lesson in the war, had watched friends die because they let their guard down, because they assumed tomorrow would come, because they believed safety was something you could count on. He wouldn't make that mistake again. When Ayanna returned, when Beth was healed, when his family was whole, then he could rest. But not before. Not while danger circled like wolves in the darkness. Not while the woman who'd kissed him in the barn was riding alone through country that wanted her dead. Not while his youngest daughter burned with fever that might steal her away forever. So he waited, and watched, and prepared. The way a father prepares, the way a soldier prepares, the way a man prepares when everything he loves hangs in the balance, and the only choice left is to stand and fight, and hope that when the dust settles, the people worth fighting for are still breathing. It was going to be a long night, and possibly an even longer 3 days, but Sam had survived worse, had buried worse, had endured worse. He could endure this too. He had to, because the alternative was unthinkable. And Sam Whitmore had spent 3 years thinking about loss. He was done thinking. Now it was time to fight. The first day without Ayanna stretched like wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Beth's fever climbed to 105 degrees, despite everything Doc Miller tried. He administered willow bark tea, applied cool compresses, dosed her with laudanum when the pain made her cry out. Nothing worked. By nightfall, the child was delirious, calling for her mother, for Ayanna, for people who existed only in fever dreams. Sam sat beside her bed through the darkness, holding her small hand, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. That Ayanna would return, that the medicine would work, that morning would bring hope instead of heartbreak. Sarah relieved him at dawn, her young face showing the weight of responsibility beyond her 14 years. "Go sleep, Papa. I'll watch her." Sam stumbled to the porch, too exhausted for sleep, too wired with fear to rest. The sun rose blood-red over the eastern plains, painting the world in shades of warning. He was drinking cold coffee and watching that ominous sky when he saw the riders coming. 3 men, 2 on horseback flanking a fine black carriage that had no business on ranch roads. The kind of carriage that belonged to Santa Fe or Denver, not the dust and poverty of Lincoln County. It moved slowly, deliberately, making sure Sam saw it coming and had time to wonder. Doc Miller appeared beside him, shotgun cradled in his arms. "That's Harrison Vale's carriage. I'd recognize it anywhere. The cattle baron himself paying you a visit. This can't be good." The name meant nothing to Sam, who, the richest man in the territory, owns 50,000 acres north of here, got his start buying up land from folks who couldn't pay their taxes. Doc's voice carried contempt. "Hard man, ruthless. If he's here, it's because he wants something. And what Harrison Vale wants, he usually takes." The carriage stopped 30 yards from the house, close enough to talk, far enough to retreat if needed. The door opened and a man emerged who looked like he'd been carved from the same stone as the mountains. Tall, broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair and eyes the color of winter ice. He wore a suit that cost more than most men earned in a year. His boots were polished to a mirror shine despite the dust. "Samuel Whitmore," the man said, his voice carrying the easy authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I'm Harrison Vale. I believe we need to talk." "I'm not selling," Sam replied. "Whatever you're here to buy, the answer is no." Vale smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't even know what I'm offering." "Don't need to. This land belonged to my father. He died defending it from Comanche. I'm not giving it up to a stranger in a fancy suit." "Even if that stranger could solve all your problems, the debt to Lincoln County Bank, the sick child, the wanted fugitive you're harboring." Vale let the words hang. "I know about Ayanna. No, she's the half-Apache woman wanted for murdering Governor Wade. No, you're protecting her, which makes you an accessory to murder. Federal crime, Mr. Whitmore. They hang men for less." Sam's hand moved toward his rifle, but the second rider dismounted and the movement froze him in place. The man was younger than Vale by 20 years, with the same strong build but kinder eyes. He wore the remnants of a Confederate cavalry uniform, faded and patched, but still recognizable. "Easy," the young man said, his voice carrying a southern drawl that stirred memories Sam had tried to forget. "We're not here to fight, just to talk. I'm Marcus Reed. I rode with Mosby's Rangers during the war. You were Union cavalry, if I'm reading your bearing right." "Second, maybe 3rd Regiment. Second," Sam admitted despite himself. "How'd you know?" "Way you stand. Way your eyes track movement. Cavalry teaches you to see everything." Marcus's smile was genuine, unlike his companions. "War's over, Mr. Whitmore. We don't have to be enemies anymore." "Then why are you riding with him?" Sam gestured toward Vale. Something flickered across Marcus's face. Shame, maybe, or regret. "He's my stepfather. Married my mother after my father died at Shiloh. I work for him because family is family even when you don't agree with their methods." Vale's eyes narrowed at that last comment, but he let it pass. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm a businessman. I make investments. Right now, I'm investing in this conversation because I believe we can help each other. Your ranch, 160 acres, it's worth maybe $300 at current market rates. I'm prepared to offer you $2,000, cash, today. Enough to pay your debt, relocate your family, start fresh somewhere else. And if I say no, then the bank forecloses in 6 days. You lose the land anyway and get nothing for it. At least my offer gives you options." Vale's voice was reasonable, logical, the tone of a man stating facts rather than making threats. "Or you could keep protecting that Apache woman until the law catches up with you both. Then your daughters become orphans. Is that what you want?" Doc Miller spat tobacco juice. "He wants you to leave Vale. Take your blood money and go." Vale ignored the doctor, his attention fixed on Sam. "I know about your sick daughter. No, Doc Miller here has done everything he can, and it's not enough. Know that the Apache woman rode into the mountains looking for medicine that probably doesn't exist. She's been gone 1 day, 2 more days at least before she returns, if she returns. Will your daughter last that long, Mr. Whitmore? Will you gamble her life on hope?" The words hit like fists. Sam felt his conviction waver, felt the terrible weight of a father's love crushing down on his certainty. "I have physicians," Vale continued, sensing weakness. "Real doctors from back east. Men who studied at Harvard, who've seen fevers like this before. I could have one here by tomorrow morning. Save your daughter's life. All you have to do is accept my offer and tell me where to find Ayanna when she returns." "You want to turn her in for the bounty?" Sam said flatly. "I want justice for Governor Wade, a good man murdered by a savage who didn't appreciate the opportunities we gave her people." Vale's mask of civility slipped slightly, revealing something cold beneath. "But yes, the bounty is $5,000, more than fair compensation for a killer." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Vale, we agreed this was just about the land." "The land and the criminal squatting on it." Vale turned to his stepson. "Don't go soft on me now, Marcus. Remember who pays your salary." Sam watched the exchange with growing understanding. Marcus Reed wasn't just uncomfortable, he was ashamed. Whatever this man's relationship with Vale, it was strained by conscience. "She didn't kill Governor Wade," Sam said quietly. "She was healing him when he died. Someone poisoned him and blamed her because she was convenient, because nobody questions when an Apache gets accused of murder." Vale's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You believe that, based on what the word of a woman who showed up at your ranch with a sob story and a pretty face? You're a fool, Whitmore. A fool who's about to lose everything because you can't see past your own loneliness." The insult should have sparked anger. Instead, Sam felt a strange calm settle over him. The same calm that had come before battles in the war, when fear transformed into clarity. "Get off my land," he said. "You and your stepson and your fancy carriage, get off my land and don't come back." "You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." Vale's face hardened. 6 days, Mr. Whitmore. That's how long until the bank takes everything. And when that happens, when you're standing in the dirt with nothing, remember that I offered you a way out. Remember that you chose pride over practicality." He climbed back into his carriage, but Marcus lingered. The young man looked at Sam with something that might have been respect. "For what it's worth," Marcus said quietly, "I hope your daughter recovers. And I hope you're right about Miss Ayanna, because if you're not, you've sacrificed everything for nothing." "I'm right," Sam said. "How do you know?" "Because I've seen enough evil to recognize good when it appears." "And she's good. Whatever else is true, that much I know." Marcus nodded slowly. "My father used to say the same thing, that you could judge a person by watching how they treat those who can't help them in return. He died believing in goodness. Sometimes I wonder if that's why he died. Or maybe he died because someone needed to remember that goodness exists," Sam replied. "Needed to fight for it even when fighting seemed hopeless." Something in Marcus's expression shifted. For a moment, the Confederate veteran looked like he wanted to say more. Then Vale's voice snapped from the carriage. "Marcus, we're leaving." The young man mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. Sam watched them disappear into the heat shimmer, feeling like he'd just been offered a choice between damnation and a different kind of hell. Doc Miller lowered his shotgun. "That was Harrison Vale. You know what you just turned down. $2,000 and my soul," Sam said. "Seemed like a bad trade." He meant what he said about the bank, about the law. Vale has connections all the way to Washington. He could make your life very difficult. My life is already difficult. At least this way I can look my daughters in the eye. They returned to the house where Sarah met them with news that made Sam's chest constrict. Beth's fever had spiked to 106. The child was convulsing, her small body rigid with seizures that Doc Miller said meant the fever was attacking her brain. "We're losing her," the doctor said bluntly. "Another few hours like this, and there won't be anything left to save." Sam knelt beside his youngest daughter and did the only thing left to do. He prayed. Not the formal prayers from church, not the memorized verses from childhood. Just raw, desperate pleading with whatever God might be listening. "Please, not her. Take me instead, please." The prayer changed nothing. Beth's breathing grew more labored. Her skin burned like coals. And outside the sun climbed toward noon, marking another day without Ayanna. Another day closer to losing everything. That evening, as shadows lengthened and hope dimmed, Sam stood on the porch watching the road for riders who wouldn't come. Emma approached quietly, her 9-year-old face serious. "Papa, do you think Miss Ayanna will find the medicine?" "I do," Sam lied, because what else could a father say? "Mama used to say that miracles happen when we're brave enough to believe in them. Do you believe in miracles?" Sam looked down at his daughter, at the trust in her eyes, and felt something crack in his chest. Margaret had believed in miracles, had believed that love and faith could overcome anything. She'd been wrong. She'd died anyway. But she'd also been right because 3 years after her death, Ayanna had appeared, a woman who'd taught his daughters to smile again, who'd shown him that hearts could heal, who'd kissed him in a barn and made him believe that maybe, just maybe, second chances were real. "Yeah, Emma," he said, pulling his daughter close. "I believe in miracles, and I believe Ayanna is bringing one home." But belief and truth weren't always the same thing. As night fell on the second day, Beth's breathing became a rattle. Doc Miller stopped trying to hide his despair. Sarah cried silently while Emma held Rosa and whispered prayers in mixed English and Apache. Sam sat beside his youngest daughter and told her stories about her mother, about the ranch, about the life she'd have when she got better, knowing even as he spoke that the words were wishes more than promises. At midnight, something changed. Doc Miller was checking Beth's pulse when he felt it slow. Her breathing, which had been rapid and shallow for hours, began to ease. The fever that had burned at 106 degrees started dropping. "I don't understand," Doc said, checking again to be certain. "This doesn't happen, not without intervention." But Sam understood, or thought he did. 2 months ago, when Beth first fell ill, Ayanna had given her a tea made from rare mountain herbs. "Drink this every day," she told the child. "It will make your body strong against sickness." Beth had obeyed drinking the bitter tea without complaint, trusting Ayanna completely. Maybe those herbs were still working in her system, fighting the fever from within. Maybe it was the prayers of 30 neighbors who'd stood ready to defend them. Maybe it was simply that Beth was stronger than the sickness, that her young body had one more fight left in it. Or maybe, just maybe, it was all three. Medicine and faith and will combining into something that looked like miracle, but was really just the stubborn refusal of life to surrender without a battle. By dawn, Beth's fever had dropped to 99 degrees. She opened her eyes, confused but aware, and asked for water in a voice that was weak but clear. Doc Miller examined her with shaking hands, tears streaking his weathered face. When he straightened, he looked at Sam with something like wonder. "She's going to live," he said simply. "I don't fully understand how, but she's going to live." But Sam understood. He walked to the window and looked out at the mountains, dark shapes against the starlit sky. Somewhere out there, Ayanna was riding home with plants that were no longer needed. And somewhere in the mystery that governed life and death, and the space between something, had decided that this child would live. Maybe it was medicine Ayanna had given Beth weeks ago still working in her system. Maybe it was prayer. Maybe it was simply that Beth was stronger than the sickness. Or maybe, just maybe, it was proof that believing in miracles sometimes made them real. "Thank you," Sam whispered to the darkness, to whatever force had spared his daughter. "Thank you." Behind him, Emma's voice was soft with wonder, and for the first time in 3 years, Sam thought she might be right. But the miracle came with a cost, because the next morning, just as the sun cleared the eastern plains, riders appeared on the horizon. Not 3 this time. 20. led by Silas Crow, and funded by Harrison Vale, coming to claim what they believed they were owed. Coming for Ayanna. Coming for blood. And Sam, standing on his porch with a rifle in his hands and determination in his heart, knew that the real battle was about to begin. 20 riders stopped just beyond rifle range, a dark line against the morning sun. Sam counted them twice to be certain, his military training kicking in despite 3 years of trying to forget. 20 against 1, hopeless odds by any calculation. But then Gettysburg had been hopeless too, and he'd walked away from that slaughter. Silas Crow sat his horse at the center, flanked by men who looked like they'd crawled out of every saloon and gambling den between here and the Mexican border. Hard men, killers, the kind who'd murder children for a hot meal and not lose sleep over it. But it was the figure beside Silas that made Sam's blood run cold. Harrison Vale, no longer hidden in his fancy carriage, wearing range clothes and a gun belt that looked well used. The cattle baron had come to watch his investment pay off. "Whitmore," Silas's voice carried across the distance, "we know the Apache woman is here. Send her out, and there won't be trouble." Doc Miller appeared beside Sam, shotgun in hand. "They're not going away this time." "I know. We can't fight them all." "I know that too." Sarah emerged from the house carrying Sam's Winchester. Emma followed with ammunition. Even Rosa stood in the doorway, Beth clinging to her skirt despite still being weak from the fever, his daughters ready to fight beside him. The thought filled Sam with pride and terror in equal measure. "Get back inside," he ordered. "All of you." "No," Sarah's voice was steel. "This is our home too. Our family. We stay." Before Sam could argue, movement caught his eye from the south. More riders, but these were different. Doc Miller was in front, but behind him came faces Sam recognized. Tom Richardson with his arthritic hands wrapped around a rifle. Mary Sullivan's husband, Patrick. James McCreary. Old Man Henderson, who'd fought at Bull Run. Women, too, carrying pistols and shotguns, their faces set with determination. They kept coming. 10 riders, 15, 20, 30. Every person Ayanna had healed over the past 2 months. Every family she'd helped. Every child whose fever she'd broken. Every old-timer whose pain she'd eased. Every mother whose baby she'd saved from colic and infection. And the 100 small deaths that stalked the frontier. They formed a line between Sam's ranch and Silas's hired guns. Not soldiers, not warriors, just ordinary people who'd decided that some things were worth fighting for. Doc Miller rode forward alone, stopping halfway between the two groups. His voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of age and respect. "Silas, you've got no jurisdiction here. No warrant that Sheriff Dalton has agreed to serve. You're on private land with an illegal posse threatening peaceful citizens. Turn around and go home before this gets ugly." "I've got a warrant from Judge Morrison," Silas shouted back. "Legal and proper." "Judge Morrison is in Vale's pocket," someone yelled from the defenders. "Everyone knows it." Harrison Vale urged his horse forward. "This is about law and order, about bringing a murderer to justice. That Apache woman killed Governor Wade. There were witnesses. There's evidence. All we want is to take her for trial." "Then where's the sheriff?" Doc Miller challenged. "If this is legal, where's Sheriff Dalton?" The silence that followed was damning. Vale's face darkened. "The sheriff is occupied with other matters, but the law doesn't stop functioning because one man is unavailable. Now stand aside before you're all charged with obstruction." "We're not moving," Doc Miller said simply. "You want to start a war over one woman? That's your choice. But it'll be your choice. Your responsibility. Your blood on your hands." For a long moment, nobody moved. The two groups faced each other across 50 yards of dust and sage, waiting for someone to blink first. The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. 4. Then Vale's patience snapped. "Take them!" he roared. Silas's men spurred their horses forward, and the world exploded into violence. Sam fired first, his Winchester barking 3 times in rapid succession. 2 of Silas's men fell wounded, not killed, clutching shoulders and thighs. Doc Miller's shotgun roared the buckshot, catching a horse that screamed and threw its rider. The defenders opened fire in a ragged volley that sent Silas's hired guns scrambling for cover behind rocks and scrub brush. But they weren't running. These were professional killers, men who'd survived range wars and cattle rustles. They returned fire with disciplined precision, bullets thudding into the ranch house walls, shattering windows. Sarah dragged Emma and Beth inside while Rosa loaded spare rifles. The defenders spread out using the barn and fences as cover, creating crossfire that made approach dangerous. Silas's men tried to flank from the north. Tom Richardson, despite his arthritis, dropped 2 with careful shots from his Henry rifle. They tried from the south. Mary Sullivan's husband Patrick, a former Confederate sharpshooter, made them pay for that mistake with 3 precise rounds that sent men diving for cover. The battle lasted 8 minutes that felt like hours. Smoke filled the air, mixing with dust kicked up by horses and men. The smell of gunpowder was thick enough to taste. Sam moved through it like he was back in the war muscle memory, taking over his body, remembering what his mind had tried to forget. He saw a man taking aim at Doc Miller and put a bullet through the attacker's rifle, shattering it and sending fragments into the man's face. Saw another trying to circle behind the barn and drove him back with 3 shots that came close enough to make the man reconsider his life choices. Then he saw Silas himself dismounted and working his way toward the house with murder in his eyes and a Colt Navy revolver in each hand. "Silas," Sam called, stepping into the open. The bounty hunter turned, fired twice. One bullet tugged at Sam's sleeve, the other kicked up dirt at his feet. Sam didn't flinch. Raised his Winchester. Aimed with the same cold precision he'd used at Gettysburg when aiming meant living and missing meant dying. "You should have taken the money and left," Sam said. "Should have," Silas agreed. "But 5,000's a lot of money. Not enough to die for." "That's where you're wrong, Whitmore. Everything's worth dying for if the price is right." Silas raised both revolvers. Sam squeezed the trigger. The Winchester kicked against his shoulder. The bullet took Silas in the chest, punching through ribs and into lung. The bounty hunter staggered, surprise replacing the certainty on his face. He tried to raise his guns for one final shot, but his hands wouldn't obey. He went to his knees, then to his face, and lay still. The shooting stopped. Silas's remaining men, seeing their leader fall, broke and ran. Vail sat his horse alone, watching his investment gallop away in clouds of dust, leaving him exposed and vulnerable and utterly defeated. Then a voice came from behind Sam's group, clear and strong, and carrying authority that made everyone turn. "There won't be any war today, gentlemen, because I'm here to prevent it." A single rider approached from the west, and Sam felt hope surge in his chest. The man wore a badge that caught the sunlight, but not the cheap tin of a local deputy. This was silver official with an eagle embossed in the center, a federal marshal. He was perhaps 50 years old, with gray threading through his dark hair, and eyes that had seen enough to make judgment without rushing to it. He rode straight to the center of the standoff and faced both groups with equal gravity. "I'm Federal Marshal Edward Kane," he announced. "I've been investigating certain irregularities in Lincoln County for the past 6 months. Irregularities involving land fraud, murder, and the corruption of local officials. So before anyone starts shooting, I suggest you all listen very carefully to what I have to say." Silas's face went pale. Vail's jaw tightened, but he held his position. "Marshal Kane," Vail said smoothly, "this is a local matter. Federal jurisdiction doesn't apply. It does when the alleged crime involves the murder of a territorial governor. That makes it federal. And it especially applies when I have evidence that the murder was committed not by an Apache healer, but by someone with political and financial motives to see Governor Wade dead." The words hung in the air like thunder before lightning. Kane continued, his voice measured and calm. 3 months ago I was contacted by a physician in Santa Fe, Dr. Herman Schultz, Governor Wade's personal doctor. He told me that the governor's death didn't match the symptoms of the poison allegedly used. He told me there were discrepancies in the autopsy report. He told me he suspected murder, but not by the accused woman. Suspected, Vale sneered. Not proof. You're right. Suspicion isn't proof. So I investigated, interviewed witnesses, examined records, followed money trails. Kane pulled papers from his saddlebag. What I found was fascinating. I found that Governor Wade was planning to enforce the Spanish Land Grant Act of 1824, an act that protects land grants issued by the Mexican government before 1848. Grants like the one held by Ayana's family. 5,000 acres in the Sangre de Cristo Range, land that someone very much wanted to acquire for its silver deposits. Vale's horse shifted nervously, responding to its rider's tension. I also found, Kane continued, that 3 weeks before Wade's death, someone made a rather large deposit in Judge Morrison's bank account, $50,000. Quite a sum for a territorial judge making $300 a year. The deposit came from a shell company owned by, let me see, he made a show of consulting his papers, Vale Cattle and Mining Enterprises. That proves nothing, Vale said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Perhaps not by itself, but combined with testimony from Dr. Schultz with the autopsy discrepancies with financial records showing similar payments to Sheriff Dalton and several county officials, it begins to paint a picture. A picture of a conspiracy to seize land by eliminating legal obstacles and framing a convenient scapegoat. Kane turned in his saddle, addressing the assembled crowd. Ayana didn't kill Governor Wade. Governor Wade was poisoned by someone with access to his private chambers, someone who knew his routines, someone who could ensure that an Apache healer would be present when he died, making her the perfect suspect, and someone who stood to gain immensely from Wade's death and Ayana's conviction. He looked directly at Harrison Vale. The question is, who benefits when a territorial governor who protects indigenous land rights dies and the woman who holds a valid land grant is executed? The answer was obvious to everyone present. Vale's face went from red to white and back to red. This is slander. I'll sue you for defamation. Sue all you want. But first you'll need to answer questions at a federal hearing. You and Judge Morrison and Sheriff Dalton and anyone else involved in this conspiracy. Kane's voice hardened. I have subpoenas, I have evidence, and I have jurisdiction. So here's what's going to happen. Mister Crow, you and your men are going to turn around and ride away. If you don't, you'll be arrested for attempted assault with deadly weapons against federal witnesses. Silas looked at Vale, seeking direction. The cattle baron's face was a mask of fury, but he was smart enough to know when a battle was lost. This isn't over, Vale said quietly. Actually, it is, Kane replied. Because in addition to investigating Wade's murder, I've been investigating land fraud. Specifically, the foreclosure practices of Lincoln County Bank. Turns out quite a few of those foreclosures were illegal. Properties seized without proper notice sold at auction for pennies on the dollar to the same buyer. Vale Cattle and Mining Enterprises. I have documentation of at least 40 instances of fraud, more than enough to void those sales and charge you with conspiracy to defraud. Vale's hands gripped his reins so tight his knuckles went white. For a moment Sam thought the man might draw his gun, might choose to go down fighting rather than face prison. But Vale was a businessman at heart, and businessmen calculated costs. Marcus, Vale said coldly, we're leaving. But Marcus Reed didn't move. He sat his horse staring at his stepfather with an expression Sam couldn't quite read. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried to everyone present. No. What? I said no. Marcus dismounted, walked slowly toward Marshal Kane. I have testimony to offer, about conversations I overheard, about orders I was given, about the night Governor Wade died and who visited his residence that evening. Vale's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little bastard, I raised you, gave you everything after your father died. You used me, Marcus corrected, used my loyalty, used my name, used my guilt over surviving the war when better men died. I've been complicit in your schemes for too long, letting family loyalty override conscience. Not anymore." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a leather-bound journal. "I kept records, dates, times, names, everything I witnessed over the past 5 years. It's all here. Every illegal land grab, every bribed official, every threat made against people who wouldn't sell." "You're a dead man," Vale hissed. "Maybe, but at least I'll die clean." Marcus handed the journal to Kane. "This should give you everything you need, Marshal." Kane accepted it with something like respect. "That took courage, son." "No, sir. Courage would have been stopping it sooner. This is just penance." Vale jerked his horse around, rage making him careless. "Crow, kill them! Kill them all!" But Silas Crow was already backing away, his hired guns following. They were mercenaries, not martyrs. Federal charges weren't worth $5,000. "Sorry, Vale," Silas called. "I don't get paid enough to hang for murder. Find yourself another dog." Within minutes, the 20 riders had scattered like dust in wind, leaving Vale sitting alone on his horse, surrounded by enemies and abandoned by allies. Marshal Kane drew his pistol. "Harrison Vale, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and corruption of public officials. You'll be tried in federal court in Santa Fe. You have the right to remain silent, though I doubt you will." 2 federal deputies Sam hadn't noticed before rode up from where they'd been watching the proceedings. They took Vale into custody. The cattle baron's face twisted with hatred as they led him away. Before they left, Marcus approached Sam. "I'm sorry," the young Confederate said, "for my part in this, for not acting sooner." "You acted when it mattered," Sam replied. "That's what counts. Your ranch, the debt to the bank Marshal Kane says those foreclosure papers were fraudulent. You own your land free and clear. It was never legally mortgaged." The news should have brought relief. Instead, Sam felt only exhaustion. Too many emotions in too short a time. Too many battles, internal and external. "Why?" he asked. "Why turn on your stepfather? What made you finally break?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Yesterday, when I rode out here with him, I saw your daughter, the sick one. And I thought about my sister. She died of fever when she was 7 back before the war. My father, my real father. He sat beside her bed for 3 days, praying for a miracle that never came. He was a good man who believed in goodness, who taught me that honor means standing up for what's right, even when it costs everything." He looked toward the mountains where somewhere Ayanna was riding home. "I've been dishonoring his memory for 5 years, letting Vale use me, watching innocent people suffer, and telling myself it wasn't my fault, I was just following orders. Same excuse soldiers use when they commit atrocities. I was done being that man, done choosing comfort over conscience." Sam extended his hand. Marcus shook it, the grip firm despite the tremor Sam felt in the younger man's fingers. Fear, probably. Or relief. Or both. "What will you do now?" Sam asked. "Testify. Then probably leave the territory. Start fresh somewhere. My name doesn't carry Vale's stain." Marcus mounted his horse. "Tell Miss Ayanna I'm sorry for everything my stepfather did, for what my silence allowed." He rode away before Sam could respond, heading south toward a future uncertain, but at least honest. The crowd of defenders began to disperse, neighbors heading back to their own ranches with promises to visit soon, to check on Beth, to welcome Ayanna home properly when she returned. Doc Miller stayed behind, his weathered face showing the strain of the confrontation. "You realize what just happened," the old doctor said. "You won. Against impossible odds, without firing a shot, you won." Sam looked at his ranch, at his daughters, watching from the porch at the mountains where Ayanna would appear within the day. "We won," he corrected. "All of us. Because people chose to stand together instead of alone." "Amen to that." Doc Miller clapped him on the shoulder. "I need to get back to town, check on some patients. But I'll be back tomorrow to examine Beth properly, make sure that fever is truly gone." After the doctor left, Sam stood alone in the yard, feeling the weight of the morning settle on his shoulders. They'd won. Vale was arrested. The land was secure. Beth was healing. But Ayanna didn't know any of this. She was still riding hard through dangerous country, still believing she was racing against death, still carrying the burden of thinking she was all that stood between Beth and the grave. Sam wanted to ride out to find her, to tell her the good news. But he couldn't leave his daughters, couldn't risk missing her if she came home a different way. So he waited. As the sun climbed toward noon, as the heat built and the cicadas started their endless song, as his daughters returned to their chores and life resumed its rhythms, Sam waited. And sometime around 3 in the afternoon, when the heat was at its worst and the air shimmered like water, he saw her. A single rider pushing a tired horse harder than she should, raising dust that marked her progress across the plain. Even from a distance, Sam knew the way she sat her saddle, the line of her shoulders, the determination in her posture. Ayanna was coming home, and everything finally was going to be all right. He walked out to meet her, leaving the safety of the porch, moving across the open ground between the house and the range. He wanted to be the first thing she saw when she arrived, wanted her to know before she even dismounted that the crisis was over, that Beth lived, that they were safe. When she was close enough to see his face, Ayanna reined in her exhausted horse. She sat there for a moment studying him, reading something in his expression that made her sway slightly in the saddle. "Beth," she called, her voice rough from dust and fear. "Alive," Sam called back. "Fever broke last night. She's weak but healing." Ayanna's face crumpled. She slid from the saddle legs, unsteady from 2 days of hard riding, and Sam caught her before she fell. She clung to him, her body shaking with sobs that were relief and exhaustion, and the release of tension held too long. "I found the plants," she said into his chest. "Rode through a lightning storm to reach them. Thought I was too late. Thought I'd failed her." "You didn't fail anyone," Sam said, holding her steady. "You never could." He told her everything while she wept, about Vale's arrest, about Marcus's testimony, about the land being secure, about the community that had stood together ready to fight for her. When he finished, Ayanna pulled back enough to look at his face. Her eyes were red from crying and dust, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her hair wild from wind and travel. She'd never looked more beautiful. "It's over," she asked, like she couldn't quite believe it. "It's over," Sam confirmed. "You're free. The land is yours. Rosa is safe. We're all safe." She kissed him, then there in the open yard where anyone could see. Not the brief, desperate kiss in the barn, but a real kiss, deep and claiming and full of promise. A kiss that said everything words couldn't capture about second chances and healing, and the way broken people could make each other whole. When they finally broke apart, Sam's daughters were standing on the porch. Sarah was smiling. Emma was crying happy tears. Beth, still weak but standing on her own, waved with both hands. That evening, after the confrontation with Vale, and the marshal's revelations after the danger had passed and the ranch was secure, Ayanna finally examined Beth properly. The child was recovering, yes, but still weak. The fever might return. The sickness might rally for one more assault before admitting defeat. Ayanna unpacked the plants she'd risked everything to find. Rare mountain yarrow that grew only at high altitudes, blue camas root that took days to locate, sacred datura that required prayers before harvesting. She prepared them with the same care she'd shown with Rosa's wound months ago, grinding and mixing and blessing with words in Apache that Sam didn't understand but felt in his bones. Beth drank the medicine without complaint, trusting completely. And over the next 3 days, the child's strength returned not slowly but steadily, color flooding back into her pale cheeks, energy returning to limbs that had been limp with fever. "Now she's truly healed," Ayanna said, watching Beth chase chickens in the yard a week later. "The fever won't return. She's strong again." Sam pulled her close. "You saved her. The journey, the risk, it mattered." "We saved her," Ayanna corrected. "You kept her alive until I returned. Doc Miller fought for every hour. The community stood ready to defend us. She lived because we all chose to fight for her." And Rosa stood beside them, finally looking like she believed the nightmare was truly over. "Come on," Sam said, taking Ayanna's hand. Let's go home." They walked together toward the house, toward family, toward a future that 2 months ago had seemed impossible. Behind them, Ayana's horse followed, carrying plants that were no longer needed, but that she'd risked everything to find. And above them, the New Mexico sky stretched endless and blue, unmarked by clouds, perfect in the way that only comes after storms have passed and the air has been washed clean. The trial of Harrison Vale began in August of 1878 in the federal courthouse in Santa Fe. Sam and Ayana made the journey with Rosa, leaving the 3 girls in Doc Miller's care. The courtroom was packed with spectators drawn by scandal and the promise of watching a powerful man brought low. Marshal Kane presented evidence methodically, building a case that was damning in its completeness. Bank records, testimony from Dr. Schultz about the inconsistencies in Governor Wade's death. Marcus Reed's journal detailing 5 years of fraud and corruption. Depositions from officials who'd been bribed witnesses, who'd been threatened families, who'd lost their land to Vale's schemes. The defense tried to discredit Ayana, painting her as a savage who'd bewitched a lonely widower who used primitive superstitions instead of real medicine, who had every reason to lie to save herself from execution. But the prosecution countered with testimony from 30 people she'd healed. Doc Miller himself testified that her knowledge was genuine, that she'd saved lives he couldn't save with all his Eastern education. The turning point came when they presented the Spanish land grant. Experts authenticated it as legitimate, issued in 1821 by the Mexican government to Ayana's great-grandfather, a French trader who'd married into an Apache family, under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The grant was legally binding. The 5,000 acres belonged to Ayana and Rosa by blood and by law. Vale's defense collapsed. Without the claim that Ayana was an illegal squatter, without the assertion that she'd murdered Wade to avoid relocation, the prosecution's case became clear. Vale had orchestrated Wade's death to remove an obstacle to his land acquisition. He'd framed Ayana because her heritage made her an easy scapegoat. He'd corrupted local officials to ensure no one questioned the narrative. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Judge Harrison sentenced Vale to 20 years in federal prison. Judge Morrison received 15 years. Sheriff Dalton got 10. Lesser conspirators received lesser sentences, but all faced justice for their crimes. Sam watched Vale's face as the sentence was read. The cattle baron showed nothing, no remorse or rage, just a cold acceptance that he'd gambled and lost. As they led him away in chains, he looked once at Marcus, who sat in the gallery with Sam and Ayana. The look held no forgiveness, no understanding, just the bitter hatred of a man who'd been betrayed by someone he'd considered property. Marcus met that gaze without flinching, and Sam thought he saw relief in the young man's eyes, the relief that comes from finally severing ties that should have been cut long ago. After the trial, Marcus approached them outside the courthouse. "I'm heading to California," he said. "Fresh start, like I mentioned, but I wanted to thank you first." "For what?" Ayana asked gently. "For giving me a reason to find my courage, for showing me that some things are worth more than money or family loyalty." He hesitated, then added, "My real father would have liked you, Miss Ayana. He believed people were people regardless of where they came from, spent his life trying to make others see that. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember his lessons." "It's never too late to choose differently," Ayana replied. "Your father would be proud of who you became in the end." Marcus nodded, blinking against emotion. He shook Sam's hand one final time, then rode west toward whatever future California held, carrying the weight of redemption and the hope that distance might ease the guilt of wasted years. They returned to Stone Creek Ranch in late August to find the place transformed. The neighbors had rallied during their absence, completing repairs Sam had been putting off for years. New shingles on the roof, fresh paint on the barn, fences mended and reinforced. The garden was thriving under Sarah's care, and Beth had regained enough strength to chase chickens and argue with her sisters. Life settled into rhythms that felt almost normal. Sam worked the ranch with renewed energy, no longer weighed down by debt or fear. Ayanna divided her time between healing neighbors and teaching the girls not just medicine, but Apache tradition stories that connected Rosa to her heritage and gave all the children an understanding of cultures beyond their own. September brought cooler weather and a question Sam had been building toward since that kiss in the yard. He waited for an evening when the girls were occupied when he and Ayanna sat on the porch watching the sun paint the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in shades of fire. "I've been thinking," he began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. Ayanna smiled, a gesture that had become more frequent in the weeks since the trial. "That's usually dangerous." "Probably." Sam took a breath. "We've been living together for 6 months. You and Rosa, your family already, in every way that matters. The girls love you. Beth calls you Mama when she thinks no one's listening. And I haven't felt this way since Margaret. Didn't think I could feel this way again." He pulled something from his pocket. A ring, simple silver worked with turquoise stones that matched the ones in the dream catcher Ayanna had made months ago. He'd commissioned it from a silversmith in town, describing what he wanted, trusting the craftsman to capture what words couldn't express. "I'm not good with speeches," Sam said. "Never have been. But I know what I want. I want you beside me. Not as a guest or a helper or someone passing through. I want you as my wife. Want to make this official in the eyes of God and the law and everyone who matters." Ayanna looked at the ring, then at Sam's face, her eyes bright with tears she didn't try to hide. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." They were married in November, on a day when early snow dusted the mountains but left the valley clear. Father O'Brien officiated, combining Christian tradition with Apache customs at Ayanna's request. The ceremony took place outdoors under cottonwood trees that had witnessed Sam's first marriage and now blessed his second. Sarah stood as witness, her young face solemn with the responsibility. Emma held flowers gathered from the last of the autumn blooms. Beth and Rosa walked together, scattering dried sage that Ayanna said would purify the space and invite good spirits. Doc Miller attended along with nearly 100 neighbors, people who'd stood with them against veil, people Ayanna had healed, people who'd learned that family extended beyond blood, that community meant protecting the vulnerable, that justice required ordinary people choosing to do extraordinary things. When Father O'Brien asked if anyone objected, the silence was profound. When Sam kissed his bride, the cheers echoed across the valley. The celebration lasted until sunset music and dancing and food shared freely. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit, Sam and Ayanna slipped away to the house, leaving the party to continue without them. In the privacy of their room, the one that had belonged to Sam and Margaret, that had been closed for 3 years, that Ayanna had gently reopened and made welcoming again. They stood together by the window. "Do you think Margaret minds?" Sam asked softly. "Me moving on, being happy again?" Ayanna took his hand. "I think she wants you to live, to raise your daughters with joy instead of grief, to show them that love doesn't end when people die, it just changes form, makes room for new love without erasing the old." Coda would think the same. Coda believed that life was for the living, that honoring the dead meant living well, not dying slowly. She leaned against him. "We both lost people we loved, but we found each other. That's not betrayal. That's grace." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one, listening to the distant sounds of celebration, feeling the solid presence of walls and roof and land that were finally truly theirs. The years that followed were good ones, better than good. Beth grew strong and healthy, the fever leaving no lasting damage. Sarah blossomed from angry teenager into a capable young woman who learned both ranching and healing, combining her father's practicality with Ayanna's knowledge. Emma became a teacher first for Rosa and Beth, then for other children in the area, as word spread that Sam's ranch offered education regardless of heritage or ability to pay. Rosa thrived learning to balance her Apache roots with the frontier life of New Mexico. She grew into a woman who could track deer through mountains and quote Shakespeare, who could prepare traditional medicines and keep account books, who embodied the possibility of bridges between cultures instead of walls. In 1881, 3 years after the wedding, Ayanna gave birth to a son. They named him Michael Samuel, honoring both traditions, and he became the bridge that made their blended family complete. Beth doted on him, treating the baby like her personal responsibility. Rosa sang to him in Apache. Sarah taught him to ride almost before he could walk. The ranch expanded as Sam reinvested profits, and Ayanna's healing practice brought additional income. They bought adjacent land when it became available, eventually accumulating over 300 acres. The cattle herd grew. They added horses, breeding strong animals suited to the harsh climate. The house was expanded to accommodate the growing family. By 1885, 7 years after their meeting, Stone Creek Ranch had become a model of what frontier life could be. Apache families camped on their land during migrations, welcomed and safe. White ranchers sought Ayanna's medical advice. Mexican families brought their children to Emma's school. The boundaries that divided the territory seemed less important here, where people were judged by character rather than heritage. Doc Miller visited often, bringing news from town and staying to share meals that mixed cultures and cuisines. He'd grown fond of Ayanna's cooking, the way she combined Apache traditions with techniques learned from her French mother, creating flavors that surprised and delighted. On one such visit in the summer of 1885, he brought news that made Sam pause in his work. "Marcus Reed is dead," Doc said quietly. "Letter came from California. Fever took him last month." Sam set down the harness he'd been mending. He was young, 35, maybe 36. 34. Same fever that takes so many out west, quick and brutal. Doc sighed. His lawyer sent a letter with his effects. "Seems Marcus left something for you." He handed Sam a sealed envelope yellowed from travel, addressed in careful script. Inside was a brief note and a deed. The note read, "Mr. Whitmore, I never properly thanked you for showing me what courage looks like. The land described in the attached deed was purchased with money I inherited from my real father. It borders your ranch to the north. I have no heirs, no family who deserve it. It's yours if you'll have it. Use it to continue building the kind of place where people like my father's dreams can come true, where goodness wins even when the odds seem impossible. Marcus Reed." The deed transferred 160 acres, doubling the size of their ranch. Ayanna found Sam sitting on the porch that evening, holding the deed and staring at nothing. She sat beside him, waiting for him to speak. "I barely knew him," Sam finally said. "Met him twice, talked to him, maybe an hour total, and he gave us this." "He gave you more than land," Ayanna replied. "He gave you proof that people can change, that standing for what's right plants seeds you might never see bloom. You showed him courage existed. He spent the rest of his life trying to be worthy of that lesson." Sam folded the deed carefully. "We should use it for something that matters, something that would make Marcus proud." "What did you have in mind?" "A school. A real one. Not just Emma teaching kids under a tree. A building where any child can learn regardless of who their parents are or what language they speak at home. A place that proves education belongs to everyone." Ayanna smiled. He'd like that. Building futures instead of hoarding land. They broke ground on the school in spring of 1886. The community rallied again, donating labor and materials. By fall, a sturdy building stood on the northern edge of their property, equipped with desks and books and a teacher's quarters where Emma could live and work. The Marcus Reed School opened in October of 1886 with 15 students of varying ages and backgrounds. Emma taught reading and arithmetic. Ayanna taught science through the lens of botany and medicine. Sam taught practical skills like ranching, and carpentry. The curriculum mixed cultures, teaching children that knowledge had no single source, that wisdom came from listening to many voices. Time moved forward in the way it does when life is full. Seasons turned. Children grew. The ranch prospered. Sam's hair grayed early stress from the war and the hard years catching up with him. Ayanna aged more slowly, her Apache heritage giving her a resilience that defied the harsh climate. Sarah married in 1889 a rancher's son who'd attended the Marcus Reed School and fallen in love with the fierce girl who could rope cattle and set broken bones with equal skill. They settled nearby, starting their own ranch with a loan from Sam and Ayanna's blessing. Emma married a teacher who came west from Boston, drawn by reports of a frontier school that taught radical ideas about equality and mixed heritage. They expanded the school, adding grades and subjects, making it a destination for families who wanted their children educated in more than just survival. Beth never married, choosing instead to follow Ayanna's path as a healer. She traveled throughout the territory, bringing medicine to remote communities, teaching others what Ayanna had taught her. She became known as the White Apache, a title she wore with pride, bridging worlds her mother and Ayanna had built. Rosa married in 1890 a son of Apache and Spanish heritage who understood the complexity of living between cultures. They settled in Albuquerque, opening a trading post that became famous for fair dealing and diverse goods. Their children spoke 3 languages and moved easily through all the communities of New Mexico. Michael grew into a young man who looked like Sam, but had Ayanna's eyes and gentle nature. He took over management of the ranch, learning from his father, but adding innovations his mother suggested. Under his stewardship, the ranch became even more successful, proof that honoring tradition while embracing change created something stronger than either alone. The years passed, good years mostly. Years filled with births and weddings, with harvests and seasons, with the ordinary miracles of life well lived. Sam turned 60 in 1903. The new century had brought changes to the territory, talk of statehood, modern inventions that made life easier and more complicated simultaneously. But on Stone Creek Ranch, the rhythms remained constant. Cattle and horses, planting and harvesting, teaching and healing. On a cool October evening in 1903, Sam sat in his rocking chair, the same one his grandfather had made, watching the sun set over land that had been paid for in courage and blood and choices that had seemed impossible when he made them. Ayanna sat beside him, silver now, threading through her dark hairlines, mapping her face like the land they'd walked together for 25 years. "Do you ever regret it?" Sam asked. "Staying here, you could have disappeared into the mountains, lived free from all this." "Free from what? From family? From home? From you?" Ayanna shook her head. "I was free the moment I stopped running, free the moment I chose to stand and fight instead of hiding. Real freedom isn't about being alone. It's about being with people who see you truly and love you anyway." Philosophical for a Wednesday evening. "I'm old. I'm allowed to be philosophical," Sam laughed. "You're 53. That's not old. Tell that to my knees when it rains." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness gathered. In the house behind them, their grandchildren were visiting, filling the rooms with noise and energy. Sarah's twins, boisterous boys who wanted to be cowboys. Emma's daughter, bookish and quiet. Rosa's 3 children visiting from Albuquerque. Beth's adopted son, a child she'd found orphaned and raised as her own. The legacy they'd built together, not just in land or buildings or money, but in people. In children who grew up believing that goodness was possible, that justice mattered, that standing for what was right had value beyond profit. "We did well," Sam said quietly. "Didn't we? We did more than well. We built something that will outlast us. That's all anyone can hope for." More years passed. The territory became a state in 1912. New Mexico joined the Union, bringing with it all the complications and promises of statehood. The Marcus Reed School became officially recognized, receiving funding and oversight. What had started as Emma teaching under a tree had grown into an institution that educated hundreds. The First World War came in 1914, taking young men to fight in distant lands. Michael's oldest son went wearing a uniform and carrying the same determination Sam had carried in 1862. The boy came home changed but whole, carrying new scars to add to the family's collection. In 1918, as the war ended and the world began counting its dead, Sam sat on his porch with his grandson Thomas, preparing the boy for his own deployment, telling him the story, passing on the lessons that had defined Sam's life. The story you've been hearing, the one that began with a wounded child in a barn and grew into something that changed everything. Thomas left for France the next day. He came home in 1919 having seen horrors that would take years to process. But he'd also learned what Sam had learned in his war. That courage meant standing for what mattered, that family extended beyond blood, that the battles worth fighting were the ones that protected the vulnerable. Sam lived to see 1925 passing at 82, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who filled the house with love and noise and the unmistakable evidence of a life well lived. He died in his sleep, Ayanna beside him, drifting away as gently as he'd arrived in that barn 47 years earlier. They buried him under the cottonwood trees near the spot where he'd married Ayanna, where the Marcus Reed School stood as testament to what ordinary people could build when they chose courage over convenience. Ayanna lived 40 more years after Sam's death. She saw the Great Depression and World War II. She saw her great-great-grandchildren born. She saw the ranch survive droughts and economic collapse because Sam had built it on foundations stronger than profit. She died in 1965 at the impossible age of 115, lucid until the end, telling stories to children who had never known a world where Apache healers were hunted, where mixed marriages were scandal, where standing for justice seemed foolish instead of necessary. They buried her beside Sam, their graves marked by simple stones that bore their names and dates, and nothing more. Because their real monument wasn't stone, it was the land that still belonged to their family, the school that still taught their values, the community that still remembered what they'd built together. In 1965, on the day of Ayanna's funeral, over 500 people gathered at Stone Creek Ranch. 5 generations of the family she'd created with Sam. Students from the Marcus Reed School spanning 6 decades. Apache families who remembered her as a bridge between worlds. White ranchers who'd learned that healing had many forms. Michael, now 77 and gray, but still strong, stood beside Ayanna's grave and spoke words his mother had taught him. She told me once that the measure of a life isn't in its length, but in its legacy, not what we accumulate, but what we give away. She and my father gave away courage, gave away justice, gave away the understanding that people matter more than profit, that standing together beats standing alone, that love is stronger than hate if we're brave enough to choose it. He paused, looking at the assembled crowd. This ranch, this school, this community, they exist because 2 broken people chose to stand when running seemed smarter, chose to fight when surrendering seemed easier, chose to love when fear seemed safer. Everything we are, everything we've built, it started with a promise kept. With 5 words spoken in a kitchen 47 years ago, now I am here. The crowd repeated it. That's our inheritance, Michael continued. Not the land, though we're grateful for it. Not the buildings, or the money, or the name. Our inheritance is the choice to show up, to stand, to fight for what matters even when the cost seems too high. My mother and father paid that cost so we wouldn't have to. The least we can do is honor them by paying it forward. After the funeral, after the crowds dispersed, and the ranch settled into evening quiet, Thomas stood on the porch his grandfather had loved. He was 65 now, a veteran of 2 wars, a father and grandfather himself. He'd heard the story countless times, but tonight he felt its weight differently. In his pocket was the dream catcher, the one Ayanna had made that winter after she married Sam. She'd given it to Thomas before she died, pressing it into his hands with fingers still strong despite her age. "Tell the story," she'd whispered. "When I'm gone, when Sam is just memory, tell the children what we built. Not so they worship us, but so they understand that ordinary people doing brave things is how the world changes. Tell them about the promise, about standing when running seemed smarter, about love that grows from choosing people over pride." Thomas held the dream catcher up to the fading light. The turquoise stones caught the last rays of sun, glowing like small pieces of captured sky. The sinew web was still strong after all these years, still perfect in its construction. Behind him, the house glowed with lamplight. His children and grandchildren were inside preparing dinner, telling their own stories, building their own memories. The ranch sprawled around him, 320 acres, now prosperous and peaceful. The fence still stood as Grandpa Sam had said it would, not because it was strong, though it was, but because generations of people had chosen to protect what was inside, had chosen to stand, had chosen to honor the promise two broken people made in 1878. Now I am here. Thomas smiled, feeling the weight of legacy settle comfortably on his shoulders. Not a burden, a blessing. He would tell the story, to his grandchildren, to anyone who would listen. Because some stories needed telling, some promises needed remembering. And this promise, the one that built Stone Creek Ranch, that created the Marcus Reed School, that bridged cultures and generations, and all the small divisions that made people forget their shared humanity, this promise was worth keeping, worth fighting for, worth passing on to children who would pass it to their children, who would pass it forward until the words themselves became part of the land, part of the sky, part of the eternal rhythm of seasons and generations and lives well lived. The promise that built Stone Creek Ranch. The promise that proved ordinary people choosing courage could reshape the world. The sun set behind the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. The dream catcher swayed gently in Thomas's hand, catching the last light, holding it like a promise that would never fade. And on Stone Creek Ranch, in the quiet of the October evening in 1965, the story lived on, as it always would, as it always should, as long as people remained brave enough to speak those four transforming words. Now I am here. The end.